Welcome back everybody to another video. And again, I know it's been a while. I am actually planning on going live at some point this week to kind of address where I've been. So if you haven't followed me yet on my socials, mostly Instagram and Twitter, you should definitely hit those up because I will be announcing the time and day that I will be going live on there. And hopefully we can all come on here and have a little chat. Anyways, so today I wanted to do a little mini care guide slash intro to a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, saltwater fish keeping. In particular, this is going to be a clownfish care guide. If you've been here for a minute, you know that I'm completely obsessed with my clownfish. They are my babies. So I'm so excited to do this video and I hope you find it helpful. And yeah, I'm probably gonna have to grab Cusco because he's already being super obnoxious. So clownfish actually make excellent beginner saltwater fish, which is great because people really like them. They have tons of personality, they are comparatively small, and they're also quite hardy. Plus everybody's seen Finding Nemo and that definitely caused a surge in popularity for these fish. A lot of people wanted to get their kids clownfish, and it led to like a huge surge of popularity in the hobby, which also led to quite a few frazzled parents not doing quite enough research. So if you are one of those frazzled parents who found this video because your child wants a clownfish, before we even get into this, I just want to say real quick, thank you. I just want to say real quick that you should not be buying any pet for your kids to be responsible for, but especially exotics like saltwater fish. Unless you are an experienced reefer who can supervise your kid and knows what they're doing, saltwater requires a lot of very precise calculations in dosing, in maintaining salinity, and messing up any one of those things can cause the death of your fish. I've been keeping saltwater fish for over a year now, and I still managed to nuke my entire tank earlier this summer because I dosed something without checking to make sure it was compatible with my tank and making sure that it was a trustworthy product. So I will link that. The second thing I would like to say is that saltwater keeping is a super immersive hobby, so it can be really good as a family activity as long as the people who are ultimately responsible for the fish, meaning the adults, take that initiative to make sure that everybody's healthy and everybody's being cared for properly and with good husbandry, and that includes water changes. So let's go over the basics of what you need in order to keep clownfish happy and healthy. Oh my gosh. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna end this here and cut straight to voiceover because that I can film in my living room and we won't have to listen to the birds. All right, I'll see you in a minute. Well, hello. It is quite voiceover Ariel. Okay, so the first thing we need to cover is what kind of tank you need. With saltwater, big tanks are usually recommended for beginners because their water parameters fluctuate less, so there's a little bit more room for error on your part. I believe nanos and big tanks both have pros and cons. Big tanks are more stable, but they also require more physical labor because water changes are heavier and so on. They're also more expensive to buy and set up and also to run. Nano tanks are smaller and require less physical work, but water changes usually need to be done more regularly, and you do need to pay close attention to your parameters, especially your salinity, because of evaporation and ammonia. This tank right here is a nano. It is the Fluval Evo, and it is 13.5 gallons. It was my first saltwater tank, and I've actually found it to be one of the easiest tanks I've ever owned. It's an all-in-one tank, so that includes lighting and chambers in the back for filtration media and space for a heater. Typically, with clowns, you want to have about 20 gallons minimum for one pair of clownfish. If you are only keeping clowns and no other fish or livestock, I do know people who keep them in 10 gallons, but I definitely wouldn't recommend going any smaller than 10 because clownfish have the capacity to grow to about 4 inches. Up top here, I'm just showing this is where the stock light used to be, and I've since upgraded to the Fluval Nano LEDs. Reason being is because I have corals. Clownfish themselves don't need specific lighting, but if you do choose to go with an anemone, for example, they do require specific lighting. Next, you need to make sure that you have a good saltwater test kit. If you are doing a fish-only tank without coral or anemones, you only need to test your pH, ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. Testing is extra important if you go with a nano tank because these parameters swing more easily due to the smaller water volume, so there's less margin for error. When I set this tank up, I tested daily. Now that it's established, I only test weekly. And I did go with the Fluval package for this as well. I'm a little bit of a fangirl. You also need either a refractometer or a salinity gauge. I use a salinity gauge, which isn't quite as accurate, but has worked well for me so far. And basically what this does is it tells you how much salt is in your water. Clownfish require their salinity to be between 1.021 and 1.026. This is something that should be tested daily because water does evaporate, but salt does not. So the salinity is constantly changing in your tank. I always keep a pitcher of dechlorinated fresh water on hand so I can top up my tank as needed. It's usually about a cup every other day. You also need to make sure that you do include a heater. I used the Fluval heater for that as well. And I keep it turned facing the outside of the tank where the display is so that I can always see when the light is on, signaling that the heater is working. You also want to check your heater regularly to make sure that it's not damaged because they can sometimes run out of whatever thing stops them from overheating your tank and totally cook your tank. So most companies will ask that you or recommend that you replace your heater yearly. I do mine every 6 months because I'm super paranoid and don't trust anything. I do also recommend adding an extra power head that you can see in the back. Your setup also needs some kind of rock work. This is important because clownfish need places to hide and feel secure, but also because the rock hosts a lot of beneficial bacteria that keep your water healthy. And you have a couple options for this. You can do live rock, dry rock, or synthetic decor. Live rock is rock that has been pulled from an already established mature tank. It has healthy bacteria on it and will speed up your cycling process. It can sometimes come with pest hitchhikers like bristleworms or Aptasia, which is the bane of my existence. So make sure that you do a really thorough inspection of any live rock before you put it in. Dry rock and synthetic decorations don't have the healthy bacteria, but also don't carry these hitchhikers. I used dry rock from Carib Sea, and I really like it. It's got lots of little nooks and crannies for bacteria to live and for my firefish to hide. So whatever rock you choose should have those qualities as well, especially with the bacteria, because it will allow them to have a higher population. And what they do is they help break down some of those gross water parameters we were just talking about, and help kind of keep the detritus and garbage in your tank at a manageable level. The goal with saltwater is to kind of try and replicate the ocean, but in a box, which is obviously unachievable, but you want to give your tank the best possible shot. So investing in some good rock will really go a long way in making that possible, and it will lighten the load on your filtration system. You also want to make sure that you give your tank a chance to cycle. This is such a touchy issue because everyone's always so excited to get their fish in the tank, but frankly, cycling a saltwater tank with fish in is not only super inhumane to the fish, it's also not a wise choice. Saltwater fish are very expensive. My clownfish each, I don't really want to talk about how much they were, but it's not very humane, and you're running the risk of losing those fish that you've invested time and money into. Take the time, let your tank cycle, let it get established. Mine took a month, but since then it's been really, really stable and I've had almost no problems with it. So it really is worth it to give it that time and space to do what it needs to do and really get established. All right, so now that we have all the boring crap out of the way, your tank is up and running, you took your time and you let it cycle and do what it's supposed to do. So now it's time to add some clownfish. So there's a couple different species of clownfish. I think the general consensus is that there's about 30 known species. The most popular two that we keep in fish tanks are Percula and Ocellaris. Ocellaris, in my opinion, are the better choice for both big tanks and nano tanks. because they're smaller and they also tend to be a little bit less aggressive. Clownfish in general can be a little bit pushy with other fish in the tank as well as with each other, but Ocellaris do a little bit better with this. They're not quite as silly and full of nonsense. And they're also a better choice for nano tanks because of their size. They max out at around 4 inches, which is pretty small for a saltwater fish, and that's why you want to make sure that you have absolute minimum 10 gallons. There's lots of different morphs for Ocellaris clownfish and Perculus as well, but I'm going to focus on Ocellaris. So there's like your standard morph, which just has the 3 stripes, the one towards the head, the one in the middle of the body, and then the one near the tail. And then there's tons of different morphs after that. Mine are snowflake morphs. So you can see on this is my clownfish, Miguel. She is a lady. But you can see on her, if she comes back here in a sec, that their middle stripe is wider and more irregular. That's pretty standard for a snowflake morph. You can also get them in black and white. You can get them with more stripes, less stripes, pretty much any kind of shape you can imagine, any kind of pattern. They probably have a morph for. There's tons of them and they all have different prices. I'd say the cheapest 2 are obviously the standard regular Ocellaris with the 3 stripes. And then snowflakes are probably like the second cheapest, depending on where you are. They're really social fish. They should be kept in pairs. You will occasionally see people only keep one. I personally think it's kind of mean. Every clownfish I've had has been really social with its friends, I guess you could call them, and they do best in pairs. So if you have more than 2, they will often compete with each other a fair bit, can lead to some bickering, and I have heard of clowns occasionally killing each other, but pairs seem to be the way to go. The cool thing about pairs is that one of them will eventually become, they both start out as male and then one will eventually become the female. So you can see with my 2 here, the smaller guy down the bottom, that's Tulio, he is the male, and then Miguel is in the process of becoming the female, so she is growing larger than him. And this little dance that they're doing right here is a submission thing. So clownfish will occasionally do this thing where they tense up and go sideways and get kind of twitchy. Right there, you can see Tulio doing it. And that is a submission thing. They will also click to each other while they do this. They sound kind of like dolphins. It's super weird, but totally normal. And that is them just bickering a little bit and establishing some dominance. For food, I feed my guys primarily bug bites pellets. They also enjoy frozen. For frozen, they get mysis, brine shrimp, spirulina occasionally, and they also get nori seaweed sometime. Wow, there's a thumb. It's beautiful. I'm editing this on my iPad because I can't find my laptop charger, so it's going to be a little sloppy, and that's also why there's no music, because it's so hard to edit on an iPad. Anyway, so I feed my clownfish twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. I did just feed them a little bit extra here because I wanted to get some good shots of them. This time of day, which is like midday was when I filmed this, they usually hang out towards the back of their tank. That's kind of like their little area that they like to hang out in. So sometimes I'll feed them a little bit extra just to get them out and moving if I want to watch them. Clownfish are notoriously pigs. They will eat pretty much anything. When I feed my coral their reefroids, my clownfish will swim into my coral and steal the food right out of their mouths, so that's rude. But you got to make sure that you put enough food in the tank for not only them, but for the other smaller fish that either are intimidated by the clownfish or not quick enough to beat them to the food, because they will eat everything. They're great. Clownfish have a lifespan on average between 3 and 6 years. I do know people online who have had them hit 12 years. They can be quite long-lived. A lot of saltwater fish actually can be really long-lived. Another question I get asked a lot is, do they need an anemone? So We all know that clownfish and anemones kind of go hand in hand. Again, we all watched Finding Nemo, but they don't necessarily need an anemone to survive. Clownfish host, it's called getting hosted by the anemone. So they have a symbiotic relationship. The clownfish live in the anemone and are immune to its sting, and that protects the clownfish from predators. And in exchange, the clownfish will bring pieces of food and feed the anemone. Also, quick side note, I don't know if you saw that little piece of filter floss that just went floating by, but literally while I was filming this and talking about the importance of keeping a lid on your tank, Tulio, my male clownfish, jumped out of my tank and landed in the filter and got tangled in the floss. So there's like a hair and a piece of filter floss floating around for the rest of this video, and it's literally because I had to like wrestle it off of him because he just pieced out of the tank. Always keep a lid on your fish tank. Even if you have to stick your hand in for just 1 sec, keep the lid on as far as you can because clownfish love to jump. It was great and not stressful at all. Anyways, back to anemones. Clownfish don't really need an anemone. They don't need it to survive in a fish tank, and they will host just about anything in your tank. Anemones are pretty hard to take care of, not recommended for beginners. I do have a whole video on them, but that's going to wrap this one up for the most part. I will be doing more fish tank care guides down the road, but thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.